What's going on, everybody? I am in Wylam, which is in downtown Birmingham. It's just a community in Birmingham, and we are talking to Jeff Shadrick today. Guys, we're going to talk about construction. We're going to talk about home building. We're going to talk about maybe some questionable parts of town. So we're going to talk about all that today. So Jeff, give us just a little bit of background of who you are, maybe how you got started in real estate.
Yeah, so I started the home building. I kind of grew up in the industry. My dad was in the home building business, and so I learned my skills right out of that while I was in high school. And then after college, went and spent several years in the banking industry, sat in an office every day and went about stir crazy. And finally, in 2008, when the market crashed, we were doing some spec home building at the time, doing lots of stuff in the Shelby County area. And all of a sudden, all of that kind of shut down when the recession hit. So it was kind of either shut the business down or try to figure out a different alternative. And we figured out that at the time you could get houses extremely cheap, spend just a few dollars putting them in and getting them up to par, getting them rented. And so we just kind of transitioned the business into that. So that's really how I got into the investment side, was personally doing it, just owning some rentals on my own. And then when the housing bubble burst, and we couldn't build anything new, we just moved over into the remodel and into the investment side of buying houses. And so that's really kind of where we got started. Been doing that since roughly about 2010, and had just kind of built up from there. And the rental market has just been fantastic here in Birmingham for us. It's a really good market for cash flow. So we just have continued to do that process. We're now obviously new construction is back in, so we're starting to get back into some more of that, doing some development projects and some build to rent stuff. I know a lot of people have heard, and that's kind of a big buzzword around, but those are some things that we're looking at in a compressed inventory market. If you can't find it to buy existing, then you go find lots and you try to build them as well. So that's really where we've kind of been, and where we are at this point is doing a mixture of remodeling, rentals, and then also trying to build some stuff.
Yeah. So pardon us, we've got dogs, we've got people, we've got cars, we've got active job sites. So pardon the noise, pardon the outside noise. Well, Jeff, you gave us a lot right there that I really want to kind of dig into. Really just start with the rental market here in Birmingham. I think a lot of people consider Birmingham is a cash flow market. Most folks from out of town or out of state, where they may not have the cash flow opportunities where they live, they try to invest in a place like Birmingham because the numbers work so well. Just kind of talk about maybe that progression since you got into it, maybe after the burst, 2010, even all the way up until now, maybe post-COVID. Where are we today versus where have we been from a rental standpoint, from a cash flow standpoint? Because housing prices are going crazy.
They have. They've actually made it a little more difficult to find deals. You got to basically uncover a lot of stones now. You got to go a lot deeper dive. Used to in 2008 through 2018, really, you could just get on the MLS if you wanted to and just find houses, go to the auctions, do things of that nature. The inventory was just there. When COVID came into play, and prices just shot up, 30-40% in a very short period of time, it really compressed the cash flow numbers. And so the marketable deals, stuff on the market, really just didn't make sense because people were trying to get retail. And they were getting it. They were getting retail pricing. And so it just didn't make sense.
From who? Who were they getting retail pricing from?
Man, people were just paying. I think because inventory was compressed, investors were still really hungry. We had a lot of out-of-state investors that were coming in. Sometimes we call that ignorant money or dumb money, but people were just paying, and it took a period of time to kind of weed a lot of those folks out, where they were realizing that, okay, wait, I'm spending too much, I'm not getting the cash flow that I need, and it makes sense. And interest rates were low, but when interest rates started to rise, it started to make those cash flow numbers shrink, and so that was a big deterrent, I think, for that period of COVID and even into some parts of now. We're starting to see a little bit of that backing off now. Interest rates are starting to pull back a little bit. But as far as properties and still finding properties, they're there. Every market has deals. You just have to know where to look for them. You have to kind of get more off of the market and actually go deeper, getting into it's really relationships, dealing with agents, building those relationships so you can kind of get deals before they go on the market. You can also get into there's not as many foreclosures right now. We're just in a period where there's not a lot of foreclosures. During pre-COVID, when everybody refinanced, got into those low 2 to 4% rates, it's harder for them to move out of that property now because
there's nowhere to go.
There's nowhere to go. They can't replace what they're currently in with something new. So that's kind of been another one of the catalysts, like everybody knows, is what's kind of caught inventories lower. But there are still opportunities, and if you're in this game, it's not it's a consistency battle. So you just consistently stay in front of your network, stay in front of the people that can either provide you with properties, or you use different marketing channels to uncover those leads and kind of ride through the storm.
Yeah. So here we are, April 2025. Housing prices are still going up. Inventory is still low. You mentioned MLS has been really difficult to try to find some of these cash flowing deals. You've got insurance is higher than it's ever been. Property taxes are higher than they've been since I've seen it here, especially here in Birmingham. All that being said, how are we still because rents have increased too,
right?
How are we able to still cash flow these things? And where you mentioned there's still opportunities, where are the opportunities and how are we still able to cash flow them?
Well, you just hit on a big thing, is that luckily rents have increased to kind of offset some of the additional expense that you're having to pay for taxes and insurance. We've seen taxes and insurance almost double over the last 24 months. And so that's really compressed our cash flow numbers, which means obviously, the old adage of you make your money when you on an investment property or any kind of property when you buy it. So it just means that you've got to get really more diligent, and when you're doing your due diligence on the front end, you got to be really cognizant of the fact of that, your expenses are going to be higher. And so you've got to factor all those eyes in. We are extremely conservative when it comes to running our numbers. And we don't make a deal work. That's the worst thing you can do as an investor, is make a deal work. You can change numbers on a spreadsheet all day long, and eventually you can make those numbers work. But in the real world, if the numbers, if everything just doesn't go perfect, or you have an AC unit go out or something, then you're shot. So you just really have to take into consideration those factors, and you have to, when you're negotiating your pricing, you have to make sure that you're getting the right deal. And right now, everybody that's on the MLS really wants retail. They've seen the progression, prices going up. So it's and even as investors, we hope to appreciate our property over time. And if you go to sell one of those properties, you don't want to give it away. You want to be able to give it at a retail rate, because you've got a lot of equity tied up into that property. So we come across that a lot. We see a lot of investors that if they're looking to sell or exit out of their properties, they're still a little unrealistic on what they want. They want to get retail as if they were selling to an owner-occupant, and not that you're selling as a rental and based on cash flow.
Right.
And so we deal with that on a regular basis, but we are starting to see, I think we've kind of seen a plateau in pricing now. I don't, you mentioned earlier that prices are still going up. I think we have kind of reached a point where we've kind of capped. And I feel like what we're seeing now is we're starting to see a little bit of a pullback on pricing. So we hope that continues, at least on the stuff that needs work. When you're buying properties, you're going to have, used to, people would just want to buy stuff that needed just marginal repairs. Where we're finding your best deals is you find the stuff like this property where, it needs a lot of work. You got to go in, you got to really bring that value up. And so it's the value add play is really, I think, where the opportunity is now.
Okay, so we're in Wylam, and this is kind of historically, it's a heavy rental area, and it has been for a long time. But it's probably, how would you classify this area? Let me put it that way.
I think, as investors, we always use that, A, B, C, D grading scale. I would probably give this maybe a C, maybe a lower C market.
Maybe that's generous.
Yeah, I think it is, but it's, the thing about it is you have to look at streets, and a lot of the stuff is street by street. So, you could have a street 2 streets over, and it would be a street you wouldn't drive down during the middle of the day. Or you can have a street like this where, we're standing out here in the middle of the morning, It's really quiet. The neighbors are keeping, the neighbors for the most part keep up their properties.
I don't see any vacant houses. I don't see any dilapidated. I don't see people like hanging out on their porches,
Right.
which is what I would typically try to look for.
Yeah, so those are things you want to be cognizant of. You want to look around, look at how well the neighbors maintain. Is there a lot of loud music playing, or trash buildup in the yards and things of that nature. So that's definitely something that you want to make sure when you're buying in some of the lower income neighborhoods. Just make sure that the neighbors kind of keep it up.
If I'm coming from out of state and I'm going to buy maybe a turnkey property, something that a company like you would come in here and you'd buy it, you'd fix it up, you'd put a tenant in there, and you're going to sell it as a turnkey product. If I'm coming from out of state and I want to buy something like that, how would I know? What maybe precautions can I take to make sure I'm buying on a good street? Is it just Google Street View? Do I just need to trust the person that's selling it to me? How can I make sure that my money's going to be safe in an area like this?
That's a good question. What we have always focused on with our out-of-state investors is really building the relationship. A lot of people want to come in and they look at it just the property, and it's a little bit more than that. You really want to work with a provider that has a proven track record, that really understands the market, that invests in those markets themselves. So we sell houses in the same neighborhoods that we invest in, and we don't typically sell to folks outside of the areas that we invest in, because we can't speak to the viability of those investments. We just don't know those areas. And so one of the things I would say for someone that's investing out of state, or at least not in their own local market, is make sure that you really vet the vendor or the person that you're dealing with, understand what their capabilities are, what services they offer, and that they understand, the right neighborhoods to go into. That's the biggest thing. If you can partner with somebody that knows the markets and knows the areas, then that's a huge plus. You're not going to be stressed out every night, thinking that, your house is getting ripped off and that kind of thing.
And I agree with all that, but on the same token, these are lower income areas. You are dealing with maybe a different type of tenant. Maybe talk about the tenant and the property management side of it. I know that that's not really necessarily what you guys do specifically, but that's something as maybe an outside investor I'm thinking about.
We typically, from that aspect, the tenant makeup is predominantly going to be in a lower income area. We're going to look and focus for a Section 8 tenant. And a couple of reasons why we do that is, one, we know that we're not dependent on that tenant for the rent. We know that it's an automated process through the housing authority. We've had the best success with those. Now, I'm not saying that you can't find straight pay tenants that are good tenants and will take care of your property, but you just have to be much more diligent on screening those tenants to make sure that they're going to perform and do what they need to do. And obviously, credit, and most of those individuals aren't going to have stellar credit, but you just look for a bar that shows that they don't have a tons of delinquents, those types of things. So it's more scrutiny on the front end for what we call a straight pay tenant. But in the lower ends, we tend to gravitate more towards a Section 8 tenant, because the rent is more of a guarantee for us. So those are types of things that we look for when we're doing these types of neighborhoods. We obviously we can't discriminate on the types or the type of tenant. If they qualify, they qualify. But there are some channels that you can follow, such as if you have a tenant moving in, go look at where they lived prior. Go look at the house that they're living in now, that they're moving out of. If they keep it up, then the odds are they'll probably keep up your tenant. Or do they have some type of a job? Do they work and at least have some type of ability to have ownership or something of that nature, and just kind of fill through those types of things. Younger kids are kind of the things that you want to tend to stay away from, just because they're young and they don't tend to take care of things as much as they normally would. But you find individuals with a couple small kids, those type, they're typically pretty straightforward.
Well, Jeff, I want to come in here and take a look at this house, and I got a lot of questions about it. Can we look
Yeah,
at the house?
absolutely.
All right, awesome.
Let's do it.